Hello, everyone. Welcome to this weekly webinar. We're just waiting another minute because we were a little delayed in starting. So just giving time for people to enter into the room. And while everyone is entering, if you would like to share where you're dialing in from, maybe what you do or your organization and your interest in today's webinar, that really helps guide us in what we're delivering and also the Q&A session later. Okay, so I think we're going to get started, and I think more people are going to trickle in as well. So my name is Valerie de Liedekerke. I'm from the Atlantic International Research Center, and I'm also the coordinator for the Blue Mission Atlantic and Arctic Lighthouse. And it's my pleasure to welcome today both Oulu University, who are the coordinators of the ICEBERG project, which is one of the projects that we will cover in this weekly hour, and also forScience Foundation, Barbara, who is here, who will present the foundation and all of the good work they do. So for now, I'm going to pass it over to our coordinators of ICEBERG, both Laura and Elise. Over to you. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Valerie, and welcome to everybody. Thank you for having us in your weekly hour. So my name is Tora Hermann, and I am a professor in social environmental sustainability at the University of Oulu in northern Finland, working mainly on human-environment interactions. And I'm here today with my co-lead of the ICEBERG project, Dr. Elise Lippi. Elise, I let you introduce.
Hi, so I'm Elise Lippi, and I'm senior researcher in geography at the University of Oulu, working as well on human-nature relationships in polar regions.
And both of us are leading the ICEBERG project, and we would like to take a couple of minutes to quickly show you an overview of the project, because the forScience Foundation and also Air Center are partners of that project. So we will share our screen. As said, this is the ICEBERG project. It's a 3-year project funded by the EU Horizon Europe funding under the topic of zero pollution. And ICEBERG studies the how ocean and coastal pollution, along with climate stress, impact Arctic environment and Arctic people. That is our first goal. Our second goal is also to partner up with indigenous communities and local stakeholders to design together gender inclusive and hopefully impactful pollution control, pollution mitigation strategies. And we have put together a wonderful, very large consortium to do this work, though 16 partners from 10 countries. And you can see we are a very multidisciplinary consortium, merging social science expertise with political science and law expertise, but also integrating AI and other highly emerging technologies, and finally having a focus as well on natural sciences and health sciences. The entire project is framed by the One Health approach. Where do we work? We work in 3 locations: in South Greenland, in northwestern Iceland, and of course in western Svalbard. And Svalbard is the focus area of the forScience Foundation work. Yeah, so we have 4 work packages that are all interconnected. WP1 is looking at what kind of sources of pollution we find Where do they come from and how do they spread? Also in the Arctic food web, WP2 is working with local communities to together monitor and track pollution and the impacts. And those results then feed into WP3, who are the focus on policy recommendations development together with local communities and indigenous communities. And we all are monitoring and always asking ourselves and reflecting ourselves of how do we work together, how indigenous communities and researchers can better work together. That is the focus of WP4, having the focus on equity, diversity, but also all our policy recommendations are to remain gender inclusive. So gender and the gender approach to all our analysis is a key in that project, and WP4 is looking in on that. You see here this hand with the smartphone. We put in place different tools and formats for citizens, citizen scientists, for local people to engage in the project and to not only gather data together with us, but also to analyze, to interpret those data together with us, to really having a participatory and engaged approach together with communities. Yeah, so here are some pictures from a recent fieldwork that show the diversity of the work that we do in ocean science, but also participatory mapping, and then working with drones to monitor litter dynamics, and also with time-lapse cameras to capture the different dynamics of marine and coastal litter. So it gives you a little snapshot of the project, but it's important to say that Air Center is part of that project, and as a partner, we are very, very happy about that. And we are also very delighted that the forScience Foundation is a partner of that project, because you have a long-standing expertise in collecting, understanding, studying marine litter in Svalbard. And that is also the focus of today's weekly hours. And we are really delighted that you're contributing with your expertise to our iceberg project. And you do much more than just iceberg. And I think with this, we are really happy to hand over now to have the real spotlight on the forScience Foundation and the wonderful work you're doing in Svalbard. So with this, Elise and I give up to you, Barbara, and also Adam, to introduce yourself and then share with us about the wonderful work you are doing.
All right, so thank you for this introduction. I will share the presentation now. All right, is it okay? Can you see it okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so the story I would like to share with you starts a good few years before the iceberg project, but I will get there eventually, so bear with me. My name is Barbara Jóźwiak, and I'm part of the forScience Foundation, which is a little Polish NGO and part of the iceberg consortium. And by little, I mean a core team of 2 people, myself and Adam Nawrot, and our main focus so far has been marine litter, and our main geographical focus is Svalbard, and especially its southernmost part known as Sørkapp Land. So Sørkapp Land is a classic wilderness. It's way off the beaten track. It's hard and expensive to get to. Its coastal waters are poorly charted, which makes the area even harder to access. There's no infrastructure of any sort out there, no people. And to top it all, Sørkapp Land lies within South Spitsbergen National Park, which means that there are also numerous legal restrictions applicable there. So all of this protects the area from the negative consequences of direct human activity, including littering. But due to the distribution of ocean currents, the west coast of Sørkapp Land, which you can see in the foreground, is the first potential accumulation zone for marine litter brought into the area by ocean currents from lower latitudes, with the West Spitsbergen current, which is indicated with the red arrow, and from the Barents Sea with the East Spitsbergen current, which is indicated by the blue arrows. And this is why many parts of Sørkapp Land look like this. But although marine litter pollution is one of the most conspicuous aspects of the more general pollution problem, in Svalbard it seemed to receive relatively little attention, both compared to other parts of the world, but also compared to other pollution types, for example, microplastic pollutions. Still, at the time when we were starting to get interested in the topic, so around the year 2018, there were two kinds of litter projects going on in Svalbard. There were research projects and there were cleanups. Research projects focused on collecting litter data, but not so much on collecting the litter itself. And this seemed like a missed opportunity to do something practical for the environment. And cleanups concentrated on collecting litter, obviously, but there was no or very little data collection involved. And this also seemed like a missed opportunity, this time to shed more light on the problem, which in this area seems rather serious. So we wanted to do both. We wanted to combine scientific work, science research, with this down-to-earth practical cleanup work. And we wanted to do it in Sørkapp land because it seemed perfect for the work we had in mind. It was strewn with litter to collect and to study. Its inaccessibility meant that we could be quite sure there was no other litter there than marine litter brought in by ocean currents. And also in terms of marine litter research and cleanups as well, it was a blank space. No one did any litter work there, which is confirmed by the data published by the LitterBase portal for marine litter. And we as forScience Foundation were quite eager to fill the gap. So we wrote a project called Sørkapp Marine Litter Cleanup. We got the funding for it from Svalbard Environmental Protection Fund. And in 2019, off we went to Sørkapp land, not really knowing what we were getting ourselves into. The plan we had was quite ambitious. The planned target area covered 32 kilometers of the coast, divided into 23 working sections. And in this respect, we were quite unique. There were other projects which collected litter data from longer sections, like, for example, the Svalbard Intertidal project, also carried out by a Polish team, with its target area of 100 kilometers, I think it was. But the numbers they generated were estimations, and all the litter was left where it was, while our plan was to clean this entire area and then weigh everything. So our numbers would be a lot more accurate. An extra challenge, apart from the length of the coast, was that unlike most cleanup teams operating in remote areas of Svalbard, our team, and there were 6 of us in that first year, was to be based on land. And we decided to work from land for several reasons. First of all, vessel rental in the Arctic is expensive, especially if you want to stay in your target area for a full month, which was our plan. And it was just simply a lot cheaper to be based on land. But there were other reasons as well. We wanted to minimize our own negative impact on the environment. And we kind of felt like burning through a lot of fuel while staying on a boat was probably not the best way to do it. And also, staying on land made us more immune to the weather because we could work in conditions that would make it impossible for a team based on a boat to even reach the shore, especially that it's lined with underwater rocks and, as mentioned before, poorly charted. But without a boat for a shelter, we needed someplace else that would accommodate the 6 of us and protect us from the elements and also from polar bears. And the only suitable-ish structure in the area was an old half-ruined trapper's cabin, which we had a permission to use, and which is located around here, which explains why we focused on the northwestern edge of Sørkapp land and not on its southernmost tip, which because of the ocean currents, is likely to be the absolute hotspot of marine litter in this part of the world. Anyway, even though we could and did work in bad weather, there were just so many challenges that we fell some 10 kilometers short of the plan. We did 15 out of the 23 planned working sections. We collected the litter, which was hard work and sometimes also quite unpleasant. We analyzed the litter as best we could, divided it into a number of different categories, weighed the categories separately for each section, and generated a bunch of data on marine litter quality, quantity, and distribution, with this being just the most general summary, just the total amount per working section and the overall amount for the entire target area. We calculated that the standing stocks that we had removed amounted on average to 187 kilograms per kilometer. And 2 years later, because 2020 was the COVID year and we had to change our plan, we went back to Sørkapp land to do it all once again and also to clean the remaining 10 kilometers. Once again, we generated plenty of data, with this again being just the most general summary. But this time, because the litter we studied had arrived in this area over the previous 2 years and not decades and decades, the state of the coast reflected relatively current issues. Models developed, among others, by Erik van Sebile suggest that it takes a litter item about 2 years to reach Svalbard from Western Europe, less if it starts on its journey further north. So with the previous fieldwork completed in 2019, we were theoretically looking some 2 to 4 years into the past at the effectiveness of rules and regulations, and also at human attitudes and behaviors, including the disregard for the rules and regulations. But despite this change in the temporal aspect of our study, the data we collected was, as you can see, still of the same sort. It was mass data per category of litter, per section of the coast, later recalculated into kilometers. The situation in 2021 looked a lot better, and the average amount of litter on the previously cleaned kilometers fell from 187 kilograms to about 42 kilograms per kilometer. But the litter was coming back, it was pretty clear, because it was zero when we left in 2019, or close to zero at least. The average litter accumulation rate for the area turned out to be just above 21 kilograms per kilometer per year, 21.2 it was, to be more specific. And the ability to come up with this number was another thing that set us apart from other litter projects carried out in Svalbard, because as far as we know, this was the first attempt to calculate marine litter accumulation rate anywhere in the archipelago. Still, there were things that we observed out there that you couldn't really see in the numbers that we generated. Like, for example, that the kilograms spread along the coast looked very different in 2019 and in 2021. In 2019, the coast was strewn with a large number of small litter items. In 2021, it was more often few bigger items. Many sections of the coast were clean. And then you came up, against this one big object of 100 kilograms in this case, and the numbers went up again. But even in sections where the overall litter mass wasn't much lower than in 2019, the visual effect was very different. And the risks associated with the litter was also very different. But even though our findings seemed quite interesting and important as well, we finished this project with this feeling that although the work we did gave a better idea of what marine litter pollution problem looks like in the far north, it wasn't really helping to solve it. But this, mind you, was not because we changed our mind about cleanups. There are lots of people who say that cleanups are pointless. We are not among them. We think they're immensely valuable for a number of reasons. First of all, they have an obvious practical value. They improve the state of the environment. They remove the immediate risk posed by stranded marine litter to local wildlife. And in remote places like Sørkapp Land, where the litter situation is the effect of years and years of litter accumulation, their effects are visible for quite a while, with new litter arriving at a rate of about 21 kilograms per kilometer per year. So cleanups lift some of the pressure from the environment while work is hopefully in progress on more systemic solutions. But there's also a less obvious practical value. We seem to be quite concerned these days about microplastic pollution. And by we, I mean the global society. A lot of effort goes into researching the topic. And although we're not yet clear on the consequences, we seem to be pretty clear on one thing. Removing microplastic from the environment is, for now, quite impossible. And at the same time, we seem to forget that a very important source of microplastic in the environment is the degradation and fragmentation of plastic litter, including stranded marine litter in the Arctic. We came across a study which estimated that even if, hypothetically speaking, the amount of plastic waste in marine and coastal environments stayed precisely at its current level, and we're talking here levels from 2019, the degradation of what's already there will likely cause the concentration of microplastics in the world's oceans to double by mid-century. And it's through cleanups that this can be prevented. So that's the practical value, but there's also the scientific value, so litter data. And that's a very big topic of its own. Before we started with Sørkapp Marine Litter Cleanup, we studied existing protocols for marine litter data collection just to make sure that the data we generate is comparable with what's already available. But there seem to be as many methods as there were projects, which is, I guess, quite typical. And these that were not developed specifically for the Arctic didn't really work that well in the Arctic context. There were considerable differences between the methods, and even large-scale monitoring schemes like those by OSPAR or NOAA were flagged as mutually incompatible. And the difference included, for example, site selection criteria, with some projects having a clear preference for sandy beaches and surveys carried out 4 times a year, which automatically excludes most of the high Arctic. There were differences in transect size and measurement unit, with some projects giving their results in meters of the coast and some in square meters of the beach. There were differences in litter items categorizations, and this was probably the most problematic aspect because there are just so many different ways to go about it. Some projects focused on the material, some focused on litter type, some had a combination of both. And also, and perhaps most importantly, there were clear differences in litter quantification method. And you had count data, so the number of items, and this is an approach followed among others by OSPAR, or you could have mass data, so the number of kilograms. And it was just impossible to tap into all this data, all the litter data that had been generated before, and contribute to it in a meaningful way. You had to kind of pick your friends. And this last difference that I mentioned, so the quantification method, count versus mass, seemed to be the most important choice to make, because once you have made up your mind, there was just no way you could later translate one into the other. So as you may have already noticed, we went for mass, and there were a few very different reasons for it. First of all, mass is more practical. litter items degrade, especially if they have been sitting, on the coast for years and years. They get brittle, they break up. So number analysis must, or at least should, be conducted right there on site before the litter is transported anywhere, because it will break in transport as well. So for larger scale analyses conducted in the Arctic, with the conditions being what they are, this is simply not feasible. Another thing which is very important and very often overlooked is context. Other relevant plastic and waste data is invariably given in tons. Plastic productions, waste generated per capita, the amount of rope lost by the commercial fishing fleet, recycling levels. This is never about the number of items. So collecting mass data puts marine litter pollution in this broader context, makes it possible to compare things, and the context gets lost if you just generate count data. And there's also the question of interpretation. One litter item can be anything. And this count information gives you absolutely no indication of what you're actually dealing with. It gives you no indication of how much microplastic the litter will eventually degrade into. It gives you no indication of the effort required to clean it up. And if it's not accompanied by mass data, it just doesn't really tell you anything at all. And it's very prone to misinterpretation. So the data we generated was mass data, so arguably better, but there was more information in the actual litter than what was visible in the numbers. And we had a feeling that the data that got disposed of along with the litter was perhaps more important or more relevant than what we actually got. Because what did we get? Well, we got the totals that you have already seen. We got mass data per category, per section of the coast for the year 2019, and then again for the year 2021, which gave us some information on litter accumulation and retention, depending on coast typography and its orientation towards the sea. We got the annual litter accumulation rates, but this only really helped us understand the physical manifestations of the litter problem, the effects of it. And what we felt we should be studying instead, or as well, were the causes behind these effects. And because the only actual cause of marine litter pollution is human activity, we decided to expand our focus to include people. And to do this, we drew on the results of another litter project completed in Svalbard a few years before, Svalbard Beach Litter Deep Dive. And this project involved a very thorough analysis of litter item, an item-by-item analysis, which drew attention to the use and disposal of these items, which means consumers. The team that analyzed the litter included specialists from the fishing sector who, drawing on their inside knowledge, were able to determine which marine or which fishing-related items were likely to have been lost at sea and which were more likely to have been discarded, just simply dumped overboard. And also, the analysis helped to identify many seemingly random litter items, like seemingly not related to the fishing industry, as also coming from fishing vessels. But consumers, or fishermen in this case, were not the only people that the project looked at. Litter items categorized as packaging were also analyzed in terms of their producers. And the recorded data included, whenever possible, brand data. So on the whole, we found this approach very inspiring, and we decided to do something similar. All we needed was an opportunity to go back to Sørkapp Land and put those new ideas into practice. And the opportunity came in 2023 with the project ICEBERG, which Tora and Elise mentioned. And the project received funding from the Horizon Europe funding program. And as you know already, it focuses on ocean and coastal pollution in 3 locations in the Arctic, one of them being Svalbard. And the forScience Foundation, which leads the work package dealing with the assessment of pollution sources, distribution, and impacts in the Arctic, is also responsible for a couple tasks carried out in Sørkapp Land, one of them being a continuation and elaboration on our Sørkapp Marine Litter Cleanup project. So with ICEBERG, we got a chance to see if our accumulation rate calculations were any good, and also to supplement our regular quantitative, qualitative, and distributional litter data, which was what we promised to collect under ICEBERG, with the deep dive data from a few selected sections, which we wanted to do as an additional thing. We got in touch with Jannicke Falk-Andersson, which was on the team of Svalbard Beach Litter Deep Dive, got guidance as to how to do the analysis, got ready forms to use, which was super helpful. And in July 2024, we returned to Sørkapp Land, to our old target area. Based on our calculations from 2021, we expected to find about 60 kilograms of litter for every previously cleaned kilometer of the coast. But surprise, surprise, the actual amount was on average only 16.9 kilograms per kilometer. And it was great. It was great to see the coast clean, but keeping in mind our experience in the area, it was just very unexpected. And the interesting thing was that the second we got to the end of this old target area, the numbers soared again. We did 4 extra kilometers, which, as far as we managed to find out, had never been cleaned before. And the values for these 4 new kilometers far exceeded the initial values from 2019, which were, if you recall, 187 kilograms per kilometer. For these new kilometers, the average was almost 400 kilograms per kilometer. And that's not even including a massive fishing net that we had to leave behind because it probably weighed about a ton, and there was just no way the 5 of us could move it. So it was quite a jump from those 16.9 kilograms to almost 400. But the increase in litter amounts as we moved further south was not a surprise, not only because these were new kilometers, but also because the currents seem to have the greatest impact around the southernmost tip of Sørkapp Land. So the closer you get to it, the more litter there is. The sudden drop in the amount of litter in the old target area, however, wasn't so easy to explain. We came with a few potential reasons for it. One was that the rules, regulations, restrictions, limitations, legislation in general was starting to have a positive effect, and that would be a great thing to observe. But there were also other possibilities. For example, that it was the climate change, which is slowing down and otherwise affecting ocean currents, that was having an influence on the amount of litter brought into the area. So this would mean that there's probably just as much litter as ever. It's just that it's ending up someplace else. And another option was that extreme weather events, also caused by climate change, were affecting litter retention in the area. And this means simply that more frequent and more violent storms were either washing the litter back into the sea or burying it in the shoreline, as you can see in the photograph. Or it could be a combination of all these things, or maybe something else entirely. We'll never know. But the fact that we got only about 550 kilograms of marine litter from the original target area, so those 32 kilometers, made it possible for us to do something that we had never thought would be possible. We had never thought we would have the capacity to do. We performed a deep dive analysis on all of it. 4,410 litter items collected from 32 continuous kilometers of the coast, the vast majority of it having arrived in the area within the previous 3 years. And just to give you a better idea of what litter items we're talking about, or I'm talking about, here are some of the many pictures that we took in the process. So as far as nets and ropes are concerned, our analysis wasn't as thorough as the original deep dive. We had a lot less space to do it, and neither of the two people who performed the analysis was an expert in the fishing gear. So, and we also had no access to the internet to look for help online. So what we failed to do in many cases was to figure out what nets or ropes we were dealing with, because there are many types. And also if they were torn or cut, so if they were lost or discarded. And this gave us less information on human behavior as a cause of litter pollution. And this was a shame, because according to research carried out, among others, by Kaylee Wiles, who did, by the way, talk about it during another Weekly Hour webinar earlier this year. The average beachgoer is much more likely to get upset at the sight of empty bottles or other public litter than at the sight of fishing nets and ropes. And this is because public litter is generally believed to end up in the environment due to carelessness, egoism, ignorance, lack of respect for the environment. And with ecological awareness on the rise, such attitudes and the resulting litter are met with strong disapproval. Not so with fishing-related litter, and probably also other industrial litter. This kind of litter, according to Kaylee Wiles and her colleagues, is seen as a necessary byproduct of the industry. And as such, it doesn't really raise much negative emotion in people. And the people and behaviors which cause its release into the environment are not really frowned upon either, and they should be. Because there's this other research, like Svalbard Beach Litter Deep Dive, and our work to some extent as well, which shows that fishing-related, like pollution with fishing-related litter is not unavoidable at all. As often as not, fishing-related items are dumped overboard, which means that, like with the public litter, their presence in the environment may be the effect of carelessness, egoism, ignorance, and lack of respect for the environment. And this is important because fishing-related litter is the most abundant by mass of all litter categories in Svalbard. And our research shows that it's getting more so with each new cleanup. And there's also other research, another recent study, which shows that fishing-related litter is the most abundant category in the rest of Svalbard as well. So it's time the public saw this fishing-related litter for what it really is, because public perceptions seem to drive environmental policy decisions as much as scientific assessments do. But while changing public perception is a task we haven't really tackled yet, we have made a few extra steps towards making this assessment a bit more comprehensive. And we kind of hope that this might eventually lead to changes in public perceptions too. So what we did was expand the brand audit, which is an initiative promoted by the Break Free from Plastic movement launched in 2016, and which in the original deep dive was done in relation to packaging, to include all litter items, including fishing-related litter. Brand identification wasn't always possible. In fact, it was usually impossible. You saw the litter you saw what it looks like, or what most of it looked like. So labels and other brand markings, they peel off, they get scraped off, they become illegible over time. Litter items get fragmented, and some of them, like nets and ropes, do not have logos or brand names printed on them at all. But we made the effort because we think that with the extended producer responsibility increasingly on everyone's lips, the information may prove very valuable. EPR, or the polluter pays principle, is a rule according to which it's not the consumer, but the entity that puts the product on the market that's responsible for its proper disposal. So it's hard to think of a better way to check if the rule is, how well the rule is enforced, and to expose greenwashing as well, than by brand auditing new litter. The thing is, though, that so far brand audits have been mostly about packaging, and this is simply not enough. In 2024, in Sørkapp, according to our own research, packaging constituted only 6.4% of all litter items and 8% of all synthetic litter. So if we want brand auditing to make a real difference, we need to apply it across the board. I wish I could tell you and show you more of our deep dive, but the analysis is still in progress, and much of the data has not been put in order yet. But if you're interested in the results, visit our website, visit the ICEBERG website, because sooner or later the data will be published, and there will be more information added to it as well, because in 2025, we're going back to Sørkapp for another round of fieldwork for more litter and for more litter data. And just to sum it up, if you do marine litter work, try to combine thorough cleanups with thorough data collection, or the other way round, because this seems to be the best way to maximize the positive impact of litter work. But while it's important to make sure the data is comparable with what's already available, it's probably even more important to ensure its usability and relevance, even if it means going against official guidelines. And also, to increase the practical value of litter data, we may want to shift our focus to include not just the effects, but also the causes of marine litter pollution, which is people, both consumers and producers. And just to finish this off, the ICEBERG fieldwork will not be the only litter work done by the forScience Foundation next season, because in the meantime, we once again got funding from Svalbard Environmental Protection Fund, this time for a project called Sørkapp Marine Litter Cleanup. And this is another individual project of the forScience Foundation, but this time our target area will not be the northwestern edge of Sørkapp, which you're looking at, but the tiny island of Sørkapp, which lies a few miles off Sørkapp's southern tip. And if you look at the currents diagram once again, that's the tiny little white speck right there. Well, it seems like there's no better place for marine litter research and cleanup in this part of the world. So there will be more information about Sørkapp Marine Litter Cleanup published on our website next year. And if you wish to know more about it and more about what we find there, well, stay tuned. And yeah, that's it for me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Barbara. That was really a fascinating and such a visually appealing presentation as well. And I learned so much. And I loved how you took us on the journey kind of from start. So like the production of plastic and its journey to where it ends up in various points on our globe. And then took us also on a look at the policy and regulations and human activities, what we might need to look at to change, and whether regulations and policy could or could not be working. And so interesting that you started kind of before COVID and were able to still go on and continue to collect data and study the region after COVID, because at the very beginning of your presentation, that was kind of one of my key questions. Was I wonder how much you might have seen an impact of COVID on plastic litter traveling to various areas. So I know I have a few questions that I've jotted down, and I see we already have one question in our Q&A. So perhaps I'll start up. There's some more coming in. So yeah, let's get started. I have a feeling we'll have a couple. So Karima has a very interesting question. She's a French master's student living in Quebec City. And her question is, do we know the proportion of litter that came from the sea, meaning boat, etc., and from terrestrial origin brought by rivers? You touched upon this a little bit.
When it comes to Sørkapp land, it all gets there by sea. There's no any other source of like a local source, because the area is completely uninhabited. So locally, no litter is sort of put there.
Okay, thank you. Then moving on to next question, Adam from our project as well, from ICEBERG. Do you think that having a regular long-term cleanup plus research activities in a place like Sørkapp could serve as indicators for marine litter? You said that recent field work would reflect recent flows. If yes, what could it indicate best? Changes in human activities, effects in regulations, human behavior, changes in flow patterns, etc. Or maybe there are just too many factors affecting litter deposition for this to serve as an indicator.
Well, I think it's a good question, but it's a difficult one. And I mentioned this, I kind of indicated this in the presentation, that we were quite surprised this year about the amount of litter. And we would be very curious to see what affected the sudden drop in the old kilometers, sorry. Because there are many options. And if we did not have the climate change going on and, you know, all the other things, that the other variables, so like ocean currents, etc., if these were stable, that would probably be a bit easier. But with all those things going on at the same time, like regulations being introduced and then climate change happening, it's very difficult. And because it's also difficult in places like Sørkapp land to have this ongoing monitoring to see what's happening in the, you know, along the coast. It's hard. We have made a tiny little step towards it, because we did put up a time-lapse camera that is supposed to look at a bit of the coast and see what's happening. And it's the reason behind it is to kind of look at the marine litter deposition and retention patterns, and to see like if it stays or if it gets washed back into the sea. But it's just one camera for now in, you know, a really big space. So this is more like an experiment to see if the camera survives. And then if this works, then we might continue with this research and try to get you know, more information on what is happening. And with checking the efficiency of the rules and regulations, it's really very difficult, because rules and regulations are one thing, but if people are actually following them, well, that's a completely different thing. And if you're not right there on that vessel, fishing or otherwise, you don't really know what people are doing. So yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, very hard. Thank you. By the way, I'm so happy you brought up the polluter pays principle, and I was wondering if you are aware of the EC Court of Auditors report on the regulation that was done in 2021 and printed. And by the way, one of their recommendations was to the EU was to stop funding projects that should be funded by the polluter. So EU-funded projects should be stopped, and it should be really pushed upon the polluter to fund these kind of projects. Just curious if, and I'm happy to share that report, by the way.
Oh yeah,
with
that would
you.
be great.
Yeah.
So then it means it's even more important to actually identify the polluters, because like I mentioned, much of the brand auditing is still done on packaging, and at lower latitudes, this is probably the most important, like the biggest category of litter. But up there in the north, in the far north, it's not. So if we want to be fair in a way towards the polluters, we should also put some of the cost on the producers of fishing gear as well.
Yes, and that was something too that was coming to mind, because I know more and more they're trying to get what is it called, the radio frequency identification tags, on fishing nets, which would allow you to track them and find them. Because obviously, I mean, to be fair to fishers, it's not in their economic interest to lose their nets. And in some countries, they provide subsidies for bringing nets that are out, they're past their due by date, for some sort of subsidy remuneration or whatnot, or to get fixed. So, and I also thought the extreme weather point that you brought up, is that maybe also what's driving more and more fishing gear being found on these beaches?
Yes, definitely. But there's this is something that we kind of became aware of thanks to this Svalbard Beach Litter Deep Dive project, that by analyzing nets, for example, you can see, if you know what you're looking at, you can see if the net was torn or if it was cut. And if it was cut, it very often means that it was just being repaired on board. And once the, repairing was over, whatever was left, instead of being stored on the vessel, was just dumped overboard. And this is something, I guess, that we should try to avoid, because there are many litter, like fishing related litter items that we find, and we know that they were not discarded on purpose, but there are also lots that were. And I think work should be done to try to prevent both, to try to work with fishermen on, just the consequence of this kind of behavior, but also work with producers on maybe trying to redesign the product. I don't know, like, I'm not an expert, but I'm sure something can be done. For example, we keep finding loads and loads and loads of plastic fishing floats. And many of them, they look as good as new. And we were trying to feed them back into the system. Like, we were trying to give them back to the fishermen, because, this would mean that you don't have to buy new ones. But nobody wants them. So even though we find like hundreds of them every season, they just get incinerated probably, because nobody is interested. So this, I think, is something that might be worked on with producers, for example, because I don't know, maybe there's some problem with how they're made, or maybe it's just cheaper to get a new one. So there's something wrong with this, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, and before I go to the next question, did they say why they refused to accept them?
No. We were never able to get like a straight answer why this is not the case, like why they don't want the fishing floats back. One suggestion that appeared was that you can't be sure if the floats are fully functional, if they had been sitting on the coast for a few years, for example. So because they are used to, keep afloat big and expensive fishing nets, it's probably easier, safer for the fishing companies to buy new floats to keep the nets safe than to risk losing the nets, because, they try to save a few euros for a new float. But then again, I think that maybe you can check the floats somehow, because really we're talking like hundreds of kilograms of plastic every season in that.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So sorry if I pronounce these names wrong. Maybe it's Ilko. Asks, in one of your photos, I saw old aluminum fish floats. So I imagine that these have been there for years. Do you know how much of the litter you found had been there for a long time?
Yeah, so it's a difficult question, and this is why everything that we find the first time we clean the coast, for example, we don't do the brand audits on the newly cleaned kilometers because it's just impossible to determine like which litter items are new. I mean, okay, you can by looking at their state, but it's a very time-consuming sort of procedure. So generally, the newly cleaned kilometers are covered mostly by old litter. As far as we know, we consulted the governor's office in Longyearbyen, and there were no official cleanups done in this area ever. So it seems that most of what we find there is old stuff. And yeah, the aluminum buoys, and then you have steel buoys as well, which are even older. So these we kind of, yeah, we include them in our statistics for litter, but in our opinion, the new litter, so the repeated cleanups give more interesting information in the sense that this is new litter. So like I said, this is reflecting current issues, current regulations, attitudes, etc. And the other things 30, 40, 50 years ago, well, we can't really do anything with this information, or we don't have an idea of how we could practically use this information to change the pollution problem.
Thank you very much for that. We got a couple of comments here in the webinar chat that I also want to go to. So I'll read first Ilko's. So the fishing boats in Arctic waters tend to stay at sea for a long stretch. For example, Russian fishing boats are resupplied by cargo vessels, who also take in the catch. These boats usually don't have good waste facilities and at the same time produce lots of waste. Also, it is often difficult and or expensive to deliver water in port. So for the crew, it's much easier to just dump stuff at sea. Very true. Thanks for sharing that and for bringing it up here in this webinar. And then I'll move on to Adam's point, which is going back to the polluter pay principle. So he says the idea was also to implement EPR and polluter pays principle, not via specific companies, but by industry associations. So the primary issue would be identifying types by producer association of litter, not necessarily specific labeling. Totally, very good point. Very good point raised. I have one other question. You mentioned that one of the changes that you were seeing was that there was, having less litter show up on some of these sites you were studying was due to a couple of different factors. One, you mentioned the climate change affecting possibly ocean currents, bringing less litter to that area and maybe bringing it to other areas. Do you have plans, or do you know of plans to model to assess where that might be then going, this litter?
We as forScience Foundation, we don't deal with modeling, so we just kind of throw it out there. Maybe someone else will get interested. We do have some ideas for what we might kind of pay more attention to next time around, and see if this maybe has some effect on the litter accumulation, but we don't want to share it just yet. We'll see how it works, and then we will sort of make it public.
Okay. All right, thank you. And so just maybe if we have time for one last question, we have 1 minute left. I don't think I see anything else in the Q&A. the question about COVID, because I think I heard you say that the litter is obviously on a delayed time lapse to getting to that region. And I don't know if you mentioned how many years that might be, 3 or 4 years, or whether it's actually possible to identify how much time it takes to get to that beach that you were looking at. Would you hypothesize that perhaps the effects of COVID now being past us, 2 years, would there be less litter coming up on these beaches due to that as well?
Yeah, you're right. Actually, this is an excellent point. We did not think of that at all. I mean, we thought about COVID during COVID, like we were thinking about how this might affect litter amounts. But yeah, like 2021 would be too soon to see the effects, because it was, just, I mean, it was still happening. The COVID was still there, right? But now, 2024, this is already enough of a delay to see the effect. And with, all the restrictions everywhere globally, less transport, less things going on, this might be one of the reasons why the amount of litter that we found this year was so much smaller than what we expected. Yeah, thank you for that.
Okay, great. Well, you're welcome. Thank you. Before we finish up, I see that Adam, your colleague, has put in the chat an answer here. He says, we forScience are talking with Institute of Oceanology researchers to create model of the local currents around Western Sørkapp. But this is a new topic, so thank you for sharing that. And I look forward to hearing maybe where that might lead to. So I want to say a big thank you to you, Barbara, and your foundation and everything, the great work you're doing and the team that you work with. Also, I'm so happy to have you on ICEBERG and be working with you in this collaboration on ICEBERG. And I also wanted to thank very much Thora and Elise for coming on and introducing the project and also representing Oulu University. It's a pleasure to work with those colleagues as well. And I'll also maybe give the floor to Thora and Elise to say some last words as well.
Yes, on behalf of ICEBERG, we basically would like to thank that we had the opportunity to be here at this weekly hour, and we invite everybody to follow ICEBERG and the project. There are much more really exciting activities to come in the next year, so please look at our website. We are also on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, so don't miss an opportunity to learn more about ICEBERG. And thank you, everyone, also for the very interesting insights, suggestions, and discussion that we had today.
Yeah, and from my side, thanks again, Barbara, for this very interesting presentation. It was really great. Even my kids were following.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you. It was really fabulous. And on the page for this event, there are the links to the project. So please do get them there. Please do find or reach out to us if you need to the links to newsletters or anything else you want to follow. We also have Blue Mission AA has a lot of webinars, so please do sign up to our newsletter to be informed of future webinars. And I just want to thank our audience today for your presence and your excellent questions. And please do share the recording of this webinar, because I just feel this really needs a much bigger audience, and I'm sure it will get a bigger audience as it stays online and is accessible. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very
Till
much.
next time. Yeah. Bye.